All right, my friends, and welcome back to the Dwarf Fortress Iceberg. We are now on Tier 5 Dark Waters. If you need to catch up, Tiers 1 through 4 are on my channel, posted just before this, so go ahead and catch up, but we're jumping right in. Tier 5, Dark Waters, first entry, flat chains in Banach spaces. So before video game development was his full-time job, Tarn Adams was a mathematics PhD. Tarn was doing advanced studies in mathematics. Flat chains in Banach spaces is the name of the dissertation he wrote for his PhD in mathematics from Stanford University. So yeah, I had no idea about this, but I mean, if he's like a genius, a once-in-a-generation game designer, it makes sense that he would have a head for math and simulating things in his mind. This dissertation was published in the Journal of Geometric Analysis. Maybe we should be calling him Dr. Adams. But the summary we have here of this dissertation is, we generalize the notion of flat chains with arbitrary coefficient groups to Banach spaces and prove a sequential compactness result. We also remove the restriction that a flat chain must have infinite mass in order for its support to exist. You can find this paper online. If you do understand anything about what that's about, I would love for you to leave in a comment. Illuminate all of us. Liberal Crime Squad. Liberal Crime Squad is another freeware game made by Tarn Adams. Tarn began work on it in 2002, and he ceased development soon after publishing his first stable version in 2004. The game is about managing a group of liberalists with the goal being to turn America freer and more tolerant by any means necessary. You'll see one later that has the opposite thing, where it's like, your main opponents are the nefarious conservative crime squad, who just want everyone to be safe and happy under the iron fist of a fascist government. So I think those are both supposed to be funny, a little satirical. In addition to its political and satirical roots, the game was originally created as a parody/homage to Oubliette, which is an obscure 1983 computer RPG with similar core party exploration and combat mechanics. However, Liberal Crime Squad took on a life of its own and grew from there. World War I Medic. This is another lesser-known Bay 12 Games freeware game published in 2004. World War I Medic makes you play an Allied medic soldier in a World War I battlefield, and your goal is to heal your Allied soldiers and to bandage wounded Germans to prevent reinforcements. The goal is to make a better score than the German medic who does the same things as you. Hearing Toady make all the game sounds by mouth is pretty funny, so all the audio is Toady making noises, which does sound pretty funny. The game is one of Toady's games not using the curses ASCII graphics, instead relying on actual, though very crude drawing. So this one actually had graphics, not ASCII. But you can check this game out. If you go on Bay 12 Games, you can check out World War I Medic. It apparently has drawings. It has Toady 1 doing all the sound effects with his mouth. World Gen Famines. So certain parameters changed during World Gen can cause famines to occur to certain civilizations. Specifically, if you turn off cavern layers, can cause famines that specifically affect dwarves, although it also affects elves to an extent. For some reason, I'm not sure why. I don't think elves get down, they don't dig, so how do they get down to the caves? This one especially, as it gets more esoteric and the write-up gets sparser, I'm gonna know less details, so feel free to chime in the comments if you know about any of these. But occasionally famines can also occur just naturally if biomes generate in a weird way that leaves civilizations without proper access to food sources. Also, kobolds are just almost always subject to experiencing famines. That's just kind of how the world works for some reason. But so that's really cool. I didn't realize that during World Gen that it did actually track food, actually simulates like harvests, and if there's nothing to harvest, then people die. So that's really interesting, actually. It never occurred to me that it would actually simulate like spawn in a desert that will actually affect their ability to grow. So that's really cool. Blank state NPCs. This is another of my favorites to discuss because it's a procedurally generated, very philosophically interesting thing that happens in Dwarf Fortress. So basically, and I have to walk you through it because there's steps. All intelligent creatures in Dwarf Fortress have a soul. This is demonstrably specific data in the game. It is coded in. You can point to the lines of code. All intelligent creatures in Dwarf Fortress have a soul. If they have sapient thoughts, they have a soul. So that contains information about its likes, its dislikes, its relations, its memories, and similar concepts. If you have a mood, if you have a personality, you have a soul in this game. Once a creature dies, their soul is still conserved in their body somehow. And we talked about this in Tier 4, I believe. We talked about how even when your adventurer dies, the adventurer, you can check with your adventurer and be like, how do you feel? And they'll be like, I feel bad, man, I'm pretty dead. So the soul stays in the body, which is pretty grimdark in this universe in general, but mechanically, that's also true. That is pretty consistently true in this game across the board. The soul stays in the body, which is probably why honoring the remains of a body is so important, and you'll get ghosts if you don't do that. But, so, blank state NPCs. Once a creature dies, their soul stays in their body. So that when a necromancer raises them, they become, specifically when a necromancer raises them as intelligent undead, they retain their soul and thus much of their original personality. They come back to life as basically who they are. Their allegiances are maintained. So like as I walk you through this, we're going to use a goblin as an example. So a goblin, hates dwarves and he loves doing all kinds of bad stuff. If you kill him, that personality remains in the body. If a necromancer brings him back to life as like an intelligent undead, an undead with a personality, he'll have that same personality. The write-up notes this is why as a necromancer it's a bad idea to raise a foe that you just killed as intelligent undead, since they will still remember that they hate you. But so if a necromancer raises a corpse as a normal zombie, which is a brainless, it has no preferences, it has no emotions, it has no soul, that destroys the corpse's soul. So that's like proper soul death, which is pretty dark as well. If you take the same corpse and it's killed again, and then it's raised as an intelligent undead, it won't remember anything from its life. It'll raise as a blank state NPC, that's the name of this one, a new creature with no soul, containing none of the information the former soul had. You try to raise it as an intelligent undead again, it won't be able to recover who it was. Pretty heavy. Armok is you. We've talked about this already in even like tier 1 and tier 2, just by accident, because it's second nature to me, I would say, in all honesty. Like, you are Armok. So Armok is the titular godhead, god above gods. Dwarf Fortress's official title is Slaves to Armok 2 Dwarf Fortress. Armok is like, in the pantheon of gods, Armok is the greatest god, and all the lore and everything fits in. You are Armok. You play this game, losing is fun. The best part of this game is making chaos, and Armok is a god of chaos, is a god of interesting dynamism, interesting changes in chaos. It's basically a chaos god. He just wants things to be interesting and to change and to be dynamic. And so, and even in the lore, he will destroy a world when it stops being interesting. That's literally just you, the player. You, the player, you jump into these situations, you try to make it as interesting as possible, you cause good things to happen, bad things to happen, and you create worlds at your leisure, and you play them until you lose interesting because they're not being interested anymore. So, if I didn't say it earlier, the original title, Slaves to Armok, God of Blood, that's you. As a god above gods in this game, because, they worship little gods of death or whatever in the game, but in a metaphysical way in the fourth dimension that they could never imagine, they are slaves to you, the player, and you play only as long as you're interested, so you serve as a proper chaos god. Cautionaurus. This is the official name for the little yellow mascot that points at things. You've probably seen this. It's a little dinosaur. It's a little yellow pixelated art dinosaur that's on a lot, especially in the Steam version. It's like on the loading screen and stuff. Apparently that's called the Cautionaurus. It's the little yellow mascot that points at things. It represents Bay 12 Games on their web pages and social media. Cautionaurus came from an old space colonization game the Adams brothers were doing around the late 90s, early 2000s. It was just a regular saurus then. It wasn't officially called the Cautionaurus. Dwarves replaced by worm people, living in a world intestine and routinely being snatched by spirits to be drowned in a lake of bile. That was the title of this one. So this is an actual quote by the Toady one. The context is very interesting. You can read it on the Bay 12 forums. I think if you Google that phrase, the link would come right up. But so basically, a Bay 12 forums user asked about plans regarding options to make World Gen more or less cruel. And they mentioned in their assumption, they were like, I feel like the existing World Gen is pretty much already at the maximum of cruelty, because Dwarf Fortress is a very grim, dark, horrifying, down to the earth, laid low kind of game. You're always scraping for survival. And you can read this up yourself. It's a long question to Toady, saying like, I think the game would be great if you could have a perfect world with like no death or violence, and then you could go even darker than standard settings. But then they said to themselves like, I don't even know, is there anything darker than the standard settings? Is that even possible? And Toady said specifically, I don't consider the current settings to be bleak and horrifying enough, or within I don't consider them to be at the maximum range you're describing. The current settings are in the middle, so your average Dwarf Fortress game actually has a lot of room to move towards utopia and, heaven, and a lot of room to move towards literal hell. And Toady said the worlds can be much more bleak and horrifying. Nothing's set in stone at this point, but we'd like to start, in the future, biasing the myth generator towards horrible starting points, events, and outcomes, and add a hard ceiling on how pleasant it can be. So this user was like, I'm sure there's a floor to the cruelty, and Toady said, no, there's not a floor to the cruelty, but there is a ceiling to the grace and pleasantness. He said, if we start out with the typical result being, quote, dwarves replaced by worm people living in a world intestine and routinely being snatched by spirits to be drowned in a lake of bile, or something like that, that's fine. And we can refine our sense of horror and playability from there. So basically, this was the Toady one's example of how much darker Dwarf Fortress could be tuned to be, and he's open to that. So make no mistake, it can always be worse. The Goblin Fortress mod. So Goblin Fortress is it's an extremely comprehensive mod. It allows you to embark as a goblin tribe without adding any additional files to the vanilla Dwarf Fortress experience, which is really cool. So it's built entirely in Dwarf Fortress, using the existing assets and mechanisms. So the goblins play extremely differently because they are entirely carnivorous and they value tools and furniture made out of bone more than anything else. So bone things are their highest priority. They even have the ability to make meat alcohol. So just very carnivorous, to the point even their furniture is being pulled out of bones from the butcher shop. They also have a different noble structure with shamans and war chiefs, tribal chieftains, and a goblin king that reports directly to the demonic entity that they obey. And we learned about this in the earlier Iceberg levels, so I didn't realize this before I started this Iceberg, but goblin kings report to a specific demonic entity. They are specifically assigned by some dark god, some higher demon. And that's one of the things you can do in adventure mode is confront the artifact. It's very difficult. You have to fight angels, which is also described in an earlier tier. But you have to fight angels, but then if you get the demonic entity's Horcrux item, you can banish that demonic entity, although it's not clear how that actually affects the goblins who still exist, now having no leader. There's also many other changes to a Goblin Fortress, like the livestock and pets they have access to, the diseases they get, and the materials they can use as common objects. If this interests you, the mod is definitely worth checking out. It's called the Goblin Fortress mod. Kobold Camp. So similar to the last one, Goblin Fortress, Kobold Camp is a mod which allows you to play as kobolds instead of dwarves. The biggest difference here is that there's virtually no mining of stone. The kobolds are only capable of digging through soil for shelter, and they are much more reliant on outdoor production, especially for wood. Within these civilizations, Kobold Camp is essentially a lower-powered DF with a much weaker civilization. There's a few additions that ease that difficulty. Kobolds can farm wood and make leather beds, and so there isn't necessarily a horrible lack of wood. Also, caravans, even with other kobolds, will have metal ores and other valuables, and they are able to use and forge gems and metal bars. So lastly, as traditional with kobolds, they have a good ability with mechanics and traps, which is almost a necessity in many cases, because it is much more difficult to raise a kobold military competent enough to fight off a siege. In earlier Iceberg entries, we talked about how kobold, for some reason, are the least militaristically organized sentient race. They can't do a siege like anyone else, like humans or elves or dwarves or goblins or anything. But so they build a lot of traps instead, which evens it out. And if you want to play something like this on the premium version, Gadget's Kobold Caverns on Steam Workshop seems to be pretty good. That's according to this write-up. I've trusted this write-up, stained class so far. So if he says something, it's probably pretty true. So Gadget's Kobold Caverns on Steam Workshop. Looking for home? In old 2D versions of the game, which didn't yet have a Z level, we talked about this in earlier levels, like with Boat Murdered, I believe. Boat Murdered may have had Z levels, but some of the earliest famous maps just don't have Z levels. It's kind of like RimWorld, where you're just on the surface. But so in that version, in old 2D versions of the game where you don't have Z levels, you can only dig to the right in version 0.23 and earlier. So if you scroll the map to the left for long enough, digging just to the left, the message will say, looking for home? Quite a long way yet. It'll appear in the center of the screen. Similarly, scrolling to the right will eventually display the message, As you journey to the center of the world, feel free to read the death announcements of those dwarves that suffer your neglect. So kind of a lose-lose. Yeah, only 1Z level, you can only dig right or left, and both of those kind of judge you for it. I'm not sure, I never played this version, so if you have experience with this, leave it in the comments why this was fun at all, what gameplay was actually to be had. It almost kind of reads in this description like it was like a Mario platformer where you're just moving to the right until something happens. Felsite. Felsite is the current name of the third month of the Dwarven calendar, covering late spring. Like other months from the Dwarf Fortress calendar, its name is based on a material name. Here, Felsite is a real-life, fine-grained volcanic rock that existed in Dwarf Fortress until version 0.31, after which it was completely replaced by dacite, a similar volcanic rock. From there, Felsite never appeared in-game, apart from the name of the third month of the year. So that's interesting, I never noticed that. Felsite is the name of a Dwarven month, but it does not exist in the game anymore, and it hasn't for a long time. The true appearance of dralthas. So even more mysterious than kobolds were the dralthas, which are an underground grazer. So it kind of like, the art in most versions kind of depicts it as like a horse, as like a strange underground horse. It's an underground grazing creature living in the first and second underground layers. Before the premium release, dralthas were described as large, long-bodied grazers with thick manes that feed on the tops of tower cap mushrooms deep under the earth. Other than that, and the fact that their mane was yellow, how they looked was completely unknown, since they're a species exclusive to Dwarf Fortress. There's no dralthas in any other fantasy or anything, so that's literally all we have. I shouldn't have said so early it was a horse. In the Steam version, it's kind of a horse now, but that's a kind of a spoiler. But so many people imagine them being fatter than how they are now in premium, with an elongated body and a tapir-like trunk. Cuddly baby tapirs, you know. So, but the creator of the official premium tile set, he said about his design, "I'm not a great concept artist though," which is not something you normally admit when you're the creator, a design creator. But he's honest, I appreciate that. He said, or they said, I'm not sure who it is, "I'd make the body longer if it wasn't for striving to keep it as tightly packed in the 32 pixel sprite as possible. Still, Toady never provided me with any details besides what it looks like in the raws. As you say, there's a lot of freedom to imagine the looks, and I love your design. I hope having an official tile set won't constrain artists with coming up with their own better designs of the fantasy creatures." So yeah, so I was speaking from this premium tile set guy, where it looks like just kind of a fancy, strange horse. It looks like an underground horse, you know, which that works for me. But apparently, you can imagine it however you want, which is cool. Others, cling to life as you are able. This is another Tarn Adams quote, which was just metal as fuck. It entered the canon. But so this is a really ancient quote from Tarn Adams back in 2004. He was originally discussing the release of quote-unquote, the Dwarf game that would become Dwarf Fortress, as it was known at the time as the Dwarf game. This was a reply to a user that said, "The game looks great, probably also the first ever ASCII game to get full motion video previews." To which Toady answered, "Hee hee hee." I noticed this in Toady's correspondences, he specifically writes hee 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 for laughing, like people might write lol, or LMAO, or haha. But Toady specifically always writes hee hee hee. So Toady said hee hee hee. "Yeah, it looks almost done. Alas, those who are in your teens, hold on to your 20s. Those in your 20s, hold on to your 30s. Others, cling to life as you are able. It should be pretty fun though." So he was just joking, referring to how long it's going to take to finish everything we want to see. In this case, full motion video in an ASCII game, which we're already kind of past. The roads have forked at that point. We'll get full motion in proper animation at this point first. It continues. If you're in your 20s, wait until your 30s. If you're in your teens, wait until your 20s. And beyond that, just cling to life as you are able. Maybe we'll see it someday. Mutant Miner is an unreleased game made by Tarn Adams that he worked on in the very early 2000s. Not much is known about it aside from the fact that it was heavily inspired by Miner VGA, which is a top-down strategy game released 1989 for DOS. So that's a throwback. However, it is technically a lost media. Lost media fans, get this to blame it on Jorge, blame it on George, because we got to find Mutant Miner. This write-up says it'll probably be lost forever. It would be interesting to see what the game was about. Since Miner VGA is about mining, and Dwarf Fortress 2, one can speculate that Mutant Miner was the missing link between these two games. Consolidated development. This is until now hidden, inaccessible by links. You know how that works, where like if nothing links to a page, it's hard to get to, but if you know the URL exactly, you can get to it. It's a Bay 12 Games website. Again, here to now hidden, offers somewhat of a roadmap to the development of Dwarf Fortress. These are listed with arcs, a theme where features will be like centered around, like the magic update, like the siege update, we're familiar. And then they also list goals, features. They're not really organized in any form of urgency, only in significance of short-term or close to completion arcs, core updates, and then extremely long goals. This page was available under the development tab of the site until its redesign in 2010, thereabouts. But you can still find it under bay12games.com/dev_single.html. Don't tell them you got it here, but I don't think they mind. Mostly now they're putting their proper roadmaps on Steam, but it does let you get into the head of the developers and the things that they're planning for the future and for the near future. So it's an interesting read. Scamps. Scamps was the pet cat of Tarn Adams. He was born on February 9th, 2009, and he lived with the Adams brothers until June 15th, 2022, at which point he passed away from widespread lymphoma at the ripe old cat age of 13. The person who wrote up this iceberg says, quote, "Now, I think I should have placed this entry higher on the iceberg. I think you're okay, writer of this iceberg. I wouldn't be too hard on yourself. I think you did a great job. Rest in peace to Scamps." Raw's duplication. So this is a little bit of a complicated one. I'm not even sure I understand it, but maybe by the end we'll figure it out together. Quote, "Having raws duplicated in raw files, either by a modding accident or intentionally duplicating them to create crazy glitch content, is a bug that happens when raws text in the raws files, which describe anything from creatures to objects to materials, is duplicated such that it leads to the game getting really confused as to what's supposed to be happening. And it has really interesting and strange outcomes. So examples are creatures being found in the wrong locations. They might have the wrong behavior. For example, they're coded as a cheetah or a sentient sapient beast or something. For some reason, all trees often drop out. Trees may be entirely absent. Grass can be composed of things that are definitely not grass. So you can have woolen grass and ice grass and stuff. Evil weather materials can be mineable, like stone. Wow, that's interesting. So like when the death cloud, when the zombifying cloud that rolls over your fortress in an evil biome, and it turns everyone into zombies, that might freeze or and somehow be able that the dwarves can break it off like stone and add it to their stockpiles instead, and much, much more. Maybe I should do a bigger video on this. This sounds crazy. But so apparently Raw's duplication, and they say by a modding accident or by intentionally duplicating them. But apparently, if you start to duplicate Raws, you can get into the back rooms of Dwarf Fortress, which is very cool. Adventurers and possibly Fortress mind control. So this is one that has been alluded subtly to in all the previous tiers. The person writing this up was very eager to talk about this, but they had to wait till the end of the iceberg. So they specifically opened the entry with that. They're like, wow, I'm glad I get to finally talk about this. But so adventurers and possibly Fortress mind control, the idea behind it is that the character you control in adventure mode is basically being piloted by you. But underneath there's still a fully sapient being. This also crosses over with the Armok is you theory, since you as a god have decided to take control over a single being just for fun. This is all stuff we talked about, if not earlier in this iceberg, in the other 4 icebergs. Check out those videos. This all makes sense if you consume, probably by the end of this, 9 hours of content. No, probably by the end of this, like 5 or 6 hours. Anyway, so Armok is you, if you take that as granted, and you are controlling this one adventurer. It also explains why you still have consciousness after you die, why an adventurer. It also explains why an adventurer still has consciousness after they die. That's still you, Armok, kind of puppeting their body. You can still sense what it's like when they die, but their soul leaves. It makes sense if the soul is stored on the body after death. But this now, I feel, is extrapolation, saying that it's Armok sensing within the corpse. That messes up my whole theology of Dwarf Fortress right now. I refuse that, actually. I believe that the adventurer corpse can smell things because souls are stored on the body, much in the way the pee is stored in the balls. Specifically, playing one player in Dwarf Fortress, it is Armok mind-controlling a sapient, sentient being. And the lore even says it was guided by forces unknown. So yeah, so that part's real, that's canon. If you retire a fortress, the text in Legends modes will say, civilization at the settlement of fortress regain their senses after an initial period of questionable judgment. So yeah, if you've ever retired, even in my reclamation mode video I did years ago, it is lore that like you as the player count as like a fugue state, either on one adventurer or even in a whole fortress, that like you compel dwarves to do things they wouldn't normally do because you're Armok. Kurtulmak. Kurtulmak is a user of the Bay 12 Games forums. His pseudonym is based on the main kobold god in Dungeons & Dragons. Kurtulmak is currently the moderator of the Slaves to Armok 1 forum, and some say he was a moderator of Dwarf Fortress forums before the forum even moved from its original address to another in 2010. However, he was almost never active, which is why some speculate his pseudonym is specifically coded to never appear connected, acting as a phantom moderator. So if there's unknown stuff happening in the Bay 12 forums, and there's no other explanation, it might be the ghost of Bay 12, Kurtulmak. Kurtulmak may not have been active since 2010 on the forums, or at least that's what his profile shows. Some forum mystery, murder mystery drama. No murder, but mystery and drama. Ashen-Tooth, Demon of Lies. This one actually rings a bell immediately in my head. I know exactly what this one is. It's a specific screenshot. It's a specific meme out there that you should be able to find. It was originally posted on Reddit by user Kromgar in 2015. This is a very, very famous screenshot. Make a note, editor may try to find that comic and just throw it up real quick, because that's actually worth it. It's funny. It shows a quick story in two parts of an adventurer investigating a plot to assassinate a king. The screenshot has become, since then, a very minor community meme, appearing every so often, despite it being debunked countless times as a fake screenshot. Because you can't ask specifically for rumors. Sigurd is an Undwarven name. Grabbing doesn't do damage, and combat logs are center-aligned while dialogue is left-aligned. Combat reports don't say pulping it. So, wow, so people really dug this apart, and no part of it is correct. It is absolutely not real, but that's a shame. I'm gonna have it up again. I'm gonna have it up through this whole period because it's a really funny one. Despite this, it's still a regular DF meme. They didn't even explain what it was. The joke is, you ask, there's like the king is hanging with his babe, he's got a consort, and you ask the consort, you say, have you heard of any plots to assassinate the king? And the consort says, oh, I heard that the Ashen-Tooth Demon of Lies is going to kill the king soon. And then the consort immediately turns into the Ashen-Tooth Demon of Lies, grabs the king's head, and pulps it in her hands. So it's like, you ask, is there any plot against the king's life? And a consort immediately says, haha, I heard about one from this one specific famous demon, and then transforms into that demon and immediately squashes the king's head like a pumpkin. Dang, I'm upset that that's not real. That's a shame. Slade mining. So Slade is like the equivalent in Dwarf Fortress of bedrock in Minecraft. It's a stone that makes up the final shell that separates you from the circus, that separates you from the core of the earth and hell and everything. It is not meant to be diggable. However, there are some exploits where you can get Slade out of the ground. Buildings related to the circus are also made out of Slade. Its particular property is to be extremely impossibly heavy, like 200 grams per cubic centimeter. So a single boulder weighs about 20 metric tons. By comparison, an equivalent volume of freshly mined platinum nuggets only weighs about 2.1 metric tons. So 20 tons for each boulder of Slade. It takes a very long time to haul. This makes Slade around 9.3 times as dense as platinum and the heaviest material in the game. It's not supposed to be collectible, as I said. However, older versions allowed exploits to mine it, notably building a downstair directly above unrevealed Slade, then digging an upstair directly below the downstair would count as digging stairs into Slade and give you some Slade boulders. This is no longer possible in versions 0.47 and beyond, although obsidian casting Slade into something other than Slade allows it to be mined. So I need that part. I read it several times and I even did some research. And obsidian casting is where you dump water on magma to suddenly make, new obsidian, is my understanding. But I don't understand how obsidian casting Slade into something other than Slade allows it to be mined. Leave in the comments if you know more about that. But yeah, Slade, you're not supposed to be able to touch it. There are a few bugs in various versions where you can get a bit and it's very heavy and it's not very useful, but it is a conversation piece in your dining hall. Dwarves eternally on fire. So this is a bug that seems to happen when disabling temperature. Not even really a bug, I consider this a feature. So for example, temperature can really make it run slower on older computers. No judgment if you have to disable temperature. Temperature doesn't do that much. It causes fire and magma and ice and things to work. So it's better to have it enabled for the full experience, but it does take, just like everything else in Dwarf Fortress, it simulates every point in space mathematically. So like it can be an even worse CPU drag than like what do you call it? Like crazy running waterworks, like a crazy water maze. Which also famously slows down gameplay, but this is like another thing. So you might disable temperature, and if you do that when your dwarves are already on fire, the game will be like, okay, yeah, they're still on fire. Nothing changed about that. However, I'm not calculating temperature, so the dwarves will just be on fire without taking damage. And they still have the on fire token, but there's no temperature, so it's just a cool thing that's happening to them. Another interesting thing about this one is that once a creature's fat is entirely burnt, this makes them almost invulnerable to fire too. So yeah, we talked about this in the Blizzard Men video, which most people didn't watch. Go back on my channel, just a few videos, and watch that if you're curious. But we actually learned a lot about how fire damage works, because we did temperature experiments on Blizzard Men who were made out of ice, and they had this like ice fat grease that would specifically fall off of them whenever they were too hot. And it would count in certain parts of the Dwarf Fortress medicine calculator as bleeding. So like I think that's probably what happens to anything that burns, is like the game will specifically destroy fat deposits and count it health-wise, HP-wise, as like bleed effect. And that's how they like simulate a burn effect, because it burns pieces away from you, and it also hurts. So like it does, at least with Blizzard Men, it does this weird thing where it will melt you like a candle, all the wax off of your core, your muscles and everything else. And then it'll also count as like severe bleeding. So the creature will probably die, but if they don't die, fire doesn't actually have much to burn, because fire is coded in specifically to like destroy fat and do damage over time. So yeah, all really interesting. If you turn off temperature while dwarves are on fire, you can have dwarves eternally on fire in a way where the fire doesn't affect anything. It's just a cool effect. And guys, we made it to the end. If you made it this far, please like and subscribe. It really, really helps the channel. YouTube is getting crueler and crueler. The walls are closing in. Thank you in advance. If you can leave me a comment, like or subscribe, share this video with somebody. It really, really makes a difference. I appreciate it. And I will catch everybody. We got 2 more tiers left. So tiers 6 and 7, and then we're going to be done. I'll probably put it in a 5 or 6 hour mega comp, just in case anybody wants to listen to it all day. And yeah, thank you. May God keep you, and may all of your endeavors be successful. See you in the next one.